Hello, this is a marvelous experience. We're in the Sarah Partridge Library in East Middlebury, and we're here today to talk with Hudson Tllford. Hudson is going to tell us stories about what East Middlebury was like when he was growing up. So I want to just turn the story time over to Hudson and tell us about this experience.
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that my mother was the first librarian here after they reopened the building at the end of World War II. The Tilford family moved to East Middlebury in the spring of 1948 while I was still gestating. The Tilford family included Arch and Alice, my parents, my sister Louise, my brother Charles, and my maternal grandmother Florence Flagg. We lived originally renting a house from Lee Sykes at 420 East Main Street, which is on the other side of the street from the library, 4 or 5 houses down. And in 1956, when I was an 8-year-old, we moved up to what is 454 now, which is almost across from the Waybury Inn. My first memory in this life was Joe Malzak telling me that there was another little boy about my age that was going to be moving into his tenement house next door. And I went and sat on that porch with about a foot-tall stack of comic books, and I could look at the pictures, but I couldn't read yet. And I met Tom Smith. We met as almost 3-year-olds, and 25 years later, I was the best man at his wedding. A couple of funny things that happened with Tom and I. My father had a wholesale bait and tackle business, and one of his customers told me that he would give us 25 bucks if we could bring him 500 little bait frogs. A lot of money for a 10-year-old in 1958. And I knew that Pryor's Pond was full of them. So Tom and I started catching them, and as the day drew nearer, we didn't have quite enough, so we subcontracted it out at 3 cents a frog to other neighborhood kids. And then we got to the 500 frogs. We needed a place for 500 frogs till the next day. We put them in the Smith's bathtub and turned a little bit of water on and put screens over the top. This was going just fine until Tom's mother came home from work, and in the dark, so she worked as a waitress, and she went into the bathroom in the dark and bumped the screen, and some of the frogs exited the tub. She wasn't very happy about that, and so they moved furniture months later and would find little dead amphibians. The other one that I got into with Tom was Tom and Dave locked me in the Smith's horse barn. I didn't want to be locked in the Smith's horse barn, so I found a pickaxe, and Tommy's father came out of the house just in time to see me splinter his barn door with a pickaxe, and I can still remember the volume of his scream when I did that. And other influences around town, there were the little stores. There used to be, when what's now a duplex by the Gristmill Bridge, was Clip Longeaway's store. He wasn't there too long. It got to be tougher and tougher to run little stores. Day's store was more of a hardware type, and Captain's Corner's store still survives in its current version as a Jiffy Mart. Willie Bean's store was around the corner on School Street, and that was the one I remember most because it had a lot of charms. If you found a soda bottle that was worth 2-cent deposit, you could take it over, and he had the most wonderful penny candy selection. As I got older, he had sports magazines. And this is back in the days before cable television, when the game of the week was the game of the week. And I got interested in sports reading magazines from Willie's store. And Willie was a philosopher and generally a positive influence in my life. The school was where the daycare is now, and I attended the first and second grade with Marge Stebbins. Joel and Oliver taught grades 3 through 6. And that school was, I believe, closed in 1956 and went to Middlebury Elementary School, which was principaled by Mary Hogan. But the school had a very large backyard, which was where a lot of sports activity went on, mostly pickup games. And there was a game that was always played, I believe it was Prisoner's Base, because if you look at that building, the driveway, the sidewalk splits that big front yard into 2 equal-sized parcels. I don't remember the rules of the game, but it was played before school, and you could just join in and go on whichever side you wanted to go, and it was played on the noon hour until the bell rang and you had to go back in. And it was the center of things. I don't remember doing this because I wasn't old enough, but my older brother talked about going over to get milk from Palmer's Dairy. The 5th and 6th graders were responsible enough to walk to Palmer's Dairy and get milk from the dairy. The 3 big employers in East Middlebury were Brown Novelty, who made toy pianos, and they had up to 40 people working there at one point. Palmer's Dairy, which made milk and ice cream, and Goodrow's Mill, that actually milled back in those days. They had raw lumber, and they'd burn the slabs in what John Goodrow referred to as Rodney's tea kettle, which burned slabs and sent smoke all over town. You could get an ice cream at Palmer's Dairy if you walked in and Mrs. Palmer wasn't too busy doing bookwork to get up and make you a cone. Sports, there was limited baseball. Neil Gleason coached a little league team that was very informal compared to the way baseball for kids is organized today, and pick-up football games. Most of that was played behind the school there, and in later years, a lot of it moved up to what is now Jack Brown Field on the Lower Plains Road. And there was schoolyard football, and I'm surprised nobody got killed because there were no such thing as pads or helmets or anything like that. That was high school kind of equipment. Other recreational possibilities, we had the gorge, which was a really nice place to swim. The water was cold enough you could drink it and be refreshed, but when it was hot, it was a nice place to be. One of the fun things of being a kid was the breadloaf students would show up and ask you if the water was cold. And it was fun to sucker them into the water, telling them how nice it's really nice, you like it. And then watch them try to walk on it, trying to get out of the river. But it had all those rocks and all those possibilities for people getting hurt. Never did. People used to jump off the bridge, but I don't remember ever seeing anyone over the age of 20 doing it. And that isn't done, I don't believe that's done much anymore because one of the storms washed most of the dirt roads of Ripton into the gorge. And it's about 2 feet shallower than it used to be. But on a hot day, it was a very nice and very popular swimming hole. In the winter, we had pine needle to go sledding on. That's drive past the grist mill on Grist Mill Road, go up the hill onto the flat, and then there's a hill that had a pretty good run. One winter, we found an old car hood, which is more fun than a sled, because about 4 of us could ride on it. The only problem was, if you hit a fence post, it would snap the fence post. And come spring, Will Combs, who owned the property, was less than thrilled with us because of the condition of his fence. He didn't shut us off, but he made it known that he was not happy about it. You could play hockey and skate on Brownie's Mill Pond. That was always fun. And I spent a lot of time playing in the woods. You could walk into the woods on either side of the river. And when I was older, I was allowed to go hunting by myself, just tuck a firearm under my arms and either go across the Grist Mill Bridge or up behind the Waybury Inn and go hunting. And you did a whole lot of hiking. Halloween was big in East Middlebury. I mean, the ladies of East Middlebury would give you a package the size of a volleyball with popcorn balls and candy in it and homemade fudge, and really good. I mean, none of this what you see today where you give a kid a pumpkin-sized hunk of plastic to put candy in. We had pillowcases. And you could start out at the Waybury Inn and go right down the street and around and get down about as far as Dayton's store and come right back up the other side of the street. And usually have a full pillowcase. One Halloween, we were sitting on the steps of the post office sorting our candy, which means that if you got something you didn't like, you threw it. We were throwing it at cars. And I got to be pretty accurate. I was accurate enough to wing a handful of gumdrops across the windshield and hood of a state police cruiser. When I saw the car coming to a halt, I grabbed my pillowcase full of riches and lit out for Palmer's Dairy and got hidden up under a milk truck. I had shiny shoes like this far off my nose and held my breath. Eventually the shiny shoes went away, and I snuck my way home through all the backyards, and I thought I was really going to be in big trouble because I thought somebody on that porch might mention my name. And I spent several days waiting for the hammer to drop with a visit from that same trooper, but it never came. I was much to my surprise. So we had a neighbor whose name I won't divulge that lived a couple of doors away from us that hated kids. And because he hated kids, we made his life miserable. We'd get into his garden, steal his grapes, and he'd holler at us. He complained bitterly to a parent when one of the kids dropped an apple core on his lawn. I got in trouble once because he had a notepad that said, "If I'm not home, leave a note." I wrote things that a 10-year-old shouldn't write on his notepad. And when I told my children about it, they asked me, "Did you get caught?" I said, "Of course I got caught." "Well, how did they catch you?" "I was the usual suspect." And my brother and my sister, who were really very, very good kids, much better than me. They got in, as growing up, into considerably less trouble than I did. But one Halloween, I believe my sister was a junior in high school, or maybe a senior, and they decided to prank Mr. Dupree. They didn't do anything terribly vicious. They just put honey and ketchup on his doors and windows. and threw old clothes and shoes on his roof. And like I said, good kids are the world's worst criminals. They're not tuned into being devious. My sister threw her gym sneakers with her name in them onto the roof. And of course, this was a very short trail back to our house because it was 2 doors away. And my sister had something, I think she had a yearbook meeting or something she wanted to get out of the house for very badly. And my father wasn't home and my mother grounded her. And she was very upset that she wasn't going to be able to get out. So she got a hold of me and says, I want you to go upstairs and make and create a distraction, and I'll sneak out. So I went upstairs, and there was a little trap door that could look down into her room, and I stuck my head down in, and yeah, you're grounded. And she complained to my mother that I was bothering her, and my mother came up the stairs, and she scooted right out the window. But again, those are just some of the things that happened while I was growing up. Anything I missed that you would ask me about?
Those are great stories, and there's lots more. When you talked about East Middlebury, did you talk about it? Was it seen as a town? Was it seen as a village? Was it seen as?
It was
what was it described like?
It was a whole lot more independent and distanced from Middlebury than it is now. I mean, the only government differences, which still exist, is East Middlebury has its own water district. It used to have its own fire district as well, but that merged with the Middlebury Fire Department. But there were some definite differences. I mean, if you were from East Middlebury, it was different than being from town.
Yeah. So, what was it when you assess it all? What was your childhood? How do you see what you did and shared, and how does that last with you? It lasted. I have friends that I stay in touch with that I grew up with here. When I drive through town here, I can still tell you who lived in every house when I was growing up. I have a soft spot for East Middlebury, and I always will. This was home. The first 18 years of my life were spent here. My parents, sometime between 1966 and 1969, when I was in the Navy, sold the house up the street and moved to Salisbury because their business needed more room than they had at that site. It was an interesting place to grow up. It was tough. I mean, there were tough kids. There were fights were not infrequent. But mostly we got along reasonably well, and there were some genuinely interesting old characters that lived here. Yeah. And it was a good experience. Thank you for sharing, and we are very appreciative of getting a bird's eye view of East Middlebury at your time. We hope that others will maybe come and tell their stories, and you'll think about others that you want to talk to, and we will continue the story of East Middlebury. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, well,
and we thank you for being here today.
Well, I can give you my perspective on it. I'm sure there's a number of other perspectives besides my own.
Good.
I think there was 500 people in East Middlebury then. There's probably 500 perspectives.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. we are glad that we can have this time with Hudson, and we're grateful for his presentation of his adventures, and it's a great thing to be able to look back on the time when we grew up in a special place. Thank you.